If you go into them with the attitude that you're not there to sell, you're there to build your network, which means you're there to meet people you find interesting, people you have something in common with, people you have a rapport with, then you can relax and you'll have more fun and you'll be more yourself. So it will become easier.
What if you had the opportunity to have a coffee with your 18-year-old self? What advice would you offer? And would you actually take the advice on offer? I'm absolutely fascinated by that question. I interview people from all walks of life, from Heineken Cup winners, New York Times bestselling authors, polar explorers, you name them, I've interviewed them. Be inspired, learn and grow from the experience of others. Welcome to the What I Know Now podcast with Mark Kelly.
My guest today is Andy Lopata. Andy is one of Europe's leading business network strategists who works with companies on how to use networking tools to develop their businesses from sales generation to career development. Andy has published 3 books on networking, and one of his books is this fantastic book. I've also got his other book, Debt Came Third, which is just an absolutely brilliant book on networking. And I've been so impressed with Andy's books that I wanted to get him on the show. Andy gets to go and speak all around the world. And I got to see him a couple of weeks ago speak at the PSA, and everybody in the room was taking notes like I've never seen before. Andy, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for inviting me, Mark.
So how do you become a business network strategist? Because probably when you're 3 or 4, you might have wanted to play for maybe Charlton Athletic. How did you get into this?
Yeah, I don't think I ever wanted to play for Charlton, even though I support them. My father co-founded a business network when I was about 29, and it coincided with the time that I decided I could never work for anyone else again. And I wanted to become a freelance writer. So while I waited for some commissions, he asked me for some help with the new business, and that was it. We spent 8 years building that network up to be one of the most successful of its kind, probably in Europe. And then once we sold that business, focused on working with companies on networking. The morphing into a networking strategist was because I recognised that we were putting these events on for our members and we weren't telling them what to do. And networking went through a transformation about 10, 15 years ago, probably coinciding with the crash, or certainly accelerated by the economic crash in 2008. But even before that. But what happened is it went from a very marginal activity. I'd never heard the word networking when I first got involved. Went from something on the margins to something that everyone said you had to do, but no one said why. So people were going to networking events because people told them, and the way they acted at those events, the lack of follow-up, the lack of any coherent plan, shouted out, we need strategy. And everyone talks about networking skills. No one talks about networking strategy.
So tell me about some of the common mistakes that you see at some of these networking events that you see from a mile away.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is networking events are not a sales opportunity. There's this networking myth that there's this mystical place full of people who buy from you called a networking event. So everyone goes in to sell. So you have a room full of people selling to a room full of people selling to them.
Nobody's
so that's
listening.
An absolute waste of time. And so that's the most obvious. So people launch into elevator pitches. They say, what do you do, without having any interest in the answer. So there's a very, very surface interaction, a very shallow interaction that's not going to build relationships. Beyond that, the biggest mistake, and there are lots I could share, but the absolute number one beyond selling to people is failure to follow up. And there's nothing more frustrating, because if we spent 10 minutes talking to each other, if we haven't got a rapport, if we have a nice conversation and know where to go, there's no need to follow up. That's absolutely fine. I respect that. But if we say we're going to follow up with each other, if we see some potential to do that, then do so. And it's amazing how few people do.
For a lot of people, and Debt Came Third is a good example with the book, it's something that is really awkward. They don't feel comfortable going over to complete strangers. As 3, 4, 5-year-olds, your mother always said, stay away from the strangers. Now we're hailing Uber cabs and we're going to live in different people's houses for weeks, a weekend. So it is changing in some ways. But what advice would you offer to people who want to develop their personal brand, develop more referrals, but they genuinely don't want to step outside their comfort zone.
It's a bit of a cliche, but I'm a great believer that cliches are cliches for a reason, because they make sense. If you don't step out of your comfort zone, you're not going to push your potential. So you have to get uncomfortable at times. Networking is a good example. Now, if you have a strong network around you already, people you've worked with in the past, your neighbours, your friends, your family, then you don't necessarily need to go to a networking event. Leverage that network more. Ask for their support. Go and find out more about what they're doing. Tell them more about what you're doing. And in some cases, they'll be open to that. In others, they won't. And just read where they are. So if you hate meeting strangers, but you already have a big network, not a problem. Just get out and have lunch more with other people. Get out and have more dinners and coffees and whatever it may be. But ultimately, if you need to grow your network, you've got to push yourself a little bit. Networking events, and let me just reiterate, because we've gone straight into networking events. Networking is not networking events. Networking events are merely a tool in the networking process, but they are a very useful tool. But if you go into them with the attitude that you're not there to sell, you're there to build your network, which means you're there to meet people you find interesting, people you have something in common with, people you have a rapport with, then you can relax and you'll have more fun and you'll be more yourself. So it will become easier.
And one thing I see through your book is that you talk a lot about going to events or speaking to people or building relationships with people, not to gain anything out of it, just to genuinely talk to people and build relationships with them, and you don't really necessarily have a set agenda where it's going to go.
I believe, we talked about strategy. You need a strategy, but your strategy is at a macro level. So here's where I want to go with my career. Here's where I want to go with my business. And I know that other people can help me on that journey by talking about me in the right places, by influencing the right people, by giving me ideas and insight and support, by giving me referrals, whatever it may be. But then when you network, you go out to meet those people. So you're building that network. So at an event, that strategy sits, in your subconscious, if you like. But actually what you're doing, when we met in Dublin, I wasn't looking at you and going, well, what can I get from this person? How does he fit into my strategy? I just showed an interest in you. You showed an interest in me, and we had what was an engaging conversation. And that's more fun and that's more relaxing. But then, going back to what I said earlier, we followed up.
And it was funny, when I saw you speak, I like to think that I'm very, very good at networking. I've worked in recruitment for the last decade or so. I've built relationships. But what was very clear to see when you were doing your presentation is how many things we can take for granted or know, but we just don't do.
Yeah.
And that's the key aspect. And you talked about being lazy or arrogant, or not maybe directly trying to upset people, but just being of the case of we don't necessarily do the things we should do, even though we might even preach it ourselves, which is a really big missed opportunity.
I want to poke people a little bit, because there is a huge amount of complacency when it comes to a lot of these things. And networking is an area where many people get complacent and think they do it well. And what I used to find is when I was nice and I would stand and give a talk on how to get referrals, 25% of the audience wouldn't listen. When I ran networking groups, or when we ran networking groups and we ran training for our members, 50% of our members would turn up. And they were the ones that did do it well. The ones that needed the support didn't turn up. The ones that don't listen to the referrals tool were the ones that were trying the old, tired routines, but they thought they knew it.
If you could offer 3 pieces of advice for people to sell through their network and try to generate more referrals, what would those 3 pieces of advice be?
The first one would be picking up on the phrase you used there, sell through your network.
Which I got from you, by the way.
Yeah. I was going to let you have the credit for that one. But sell through, but not to your network. So I have a very simple philosophy. All things being equal, I would much rather you refer me 5 times than buy from me once. Because all things being equal, that's 5 times the value to me. But also, if you trust me enough to refer me 5 times, and if you understand what I do well enough to recognise the right opportunities, then if you need what I offer, you're going to buy from me anyway. So that's the first, is sell through the network rather than to the network. The second would be to have a really clear idea of how people can help you, the referrals you're looking for. Because if you don't know, they won't know.
Yeah.
So, and this was the first thing that I shared in the talk that you came to, distill it down to really specific introductions that you're looking for, because the more specific they are, the more you can justify them. You can make people understand why that introduction is necessary and make it easy for them to do so. And I guess the third thing picks up from that, and that is make it as easy as possible for your champions to refer you. Make it, something they don't even have to think about. This makes so much sense. It's really easy to do, and they'll just do it. So, tee it up for them to make it simple.
Brilliant. You offer some brilliant advice around giving gifts and being very thoughtful in your gifts. Would you maybe share some examples around maybe that little tree example? I thought it was a particularly nice story.
Yeah, so one of the things that really fascinates me, I guess, is how lazy we are in the way we thank people. Now, whether it's thanking someone who's referred you or supported you or it's just been a client, it is frightening how many bottles of wine and whiskey are given out every year to teetotalers or just people who drink something different to wine or whiskey. We just get lazy and we go through the motions. And it doesn't take much effort to personalise a gift. So the story I shared in Dublin was a referral that had been passed 4 years before, but had turned into a lot of work with one company. One of the guys on that team had left and become the MD of another company and booked me for another 1 year program. So I wanted to thank my original champion. And I knew a friend of mine had had dinner with her the week before. So I asked my friend, what had Claire been talking about over dinner? And Kelly told me that she'd been talking about planting trees in her garden. So I went online, I bought her a tree. Now that may sound like a huge effort, but it was one phone call and going on the internet and booking something. We had a colleague of mine emceed a conference for me recently, a charity conference. And I went onto his Facebook page. I found a picture that I knew would mean a lot to him. He's a West Ham fan, and it was a picture of him with Billy Bonds on the pitch at West Ham. And I went online and I went to a particular site and I had it converted into a 200-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Brilliant.
It takes seconds,
I know.
but it's personal. And
These
these are
the difference.
Simple things that we can make, that we can take that make such a big impact.
Yeah, such a difference, such a smart move. I genuinely could talk to you all day because this stuff just gives me endorphin rush. Just such smart things to do, but it makes such a big difference. And it's the small things that actually really, really resonate with people because they're so personal. So tell me about the fourth book, because I was talking about how detailed Depth Came Third was, and I know that, as you were saying, this book's going to even be more detailed. So what's the fourth book got in store?
So the working title is Bigger Than You. I'm due to submit the manuscript in January of 2019, and it will come out, all being well, in August or the autumn of 2019. The concept, the precept of the book is that we're not open enough to ask for help and support. And in many cultures, we're taught that weakness, the vulnerability is a sign of weakness, that honesty, that not knowing is a sign of weakness. And that stunts us as individuals, it stunts us as companies and businesses and as a culture as well. So I want to encourage people to surround themselves with trusted contacts in whom they are confident and comfortable turning to and saying, I don't know, or I'm struggling, or I need help. And also being there for their networks and ensuring that their networks feel that they can confide in them. So what I'm planning to do is interview people from all walks of life from around the world and get stories of how their vulnerability has helped them, how having the right network around them has made a huge difference, or in fact where they haven't, and it's held them back. And I want to talk to people who don't believe in this and think you have to be strong and you have to deal with it yourself, and find out why. And we want to do a bit of research as well, probably in the States, possibly globally, into the power of honesty and transparency in the workplace.
So if you're sitting with an 18-year-old self, Andy, what advice are you sharing?
I am a believer that things happen for a reason. I'm not necessarily into fate and so on. If you say, would you go back and change things? I'm not sure there is much I would change in my life, because as a result of everything I've done, I've ended up here. There's that famous film, Sliding Doors, where if she got the tube, her life would have gone one way. If she missed it, her life would have gone another. And I can see that in my life, in many ways. I was with someone who might have been the perfect woman for me, but I was too young. But if I'd have settled down then, I wouldn't have travelled the world. I wouldn't have worked on film sets, which I loved. I wouldn't be doing what I do now. So I wouldn't change too much of what I had done. The key thing that I would say to an 18-year-old me is that what the system tells you to do is not necessarily the right thing for you. I was brought up in a typical middle-class family where I was expected to go to university, become an accountant or lawyer, have 2.4 kids, etc., etc., etc. That's not been my life path. I was accepted to study accountancy at university. I changed my degree at the last minute to politics. I didn't even complete that because I wanted to go and work in the record industry, and there weren't openings for graduates then. I lasted in the record industry 3 months. I was at a dinner last night where we were talking about a lot of the guys who were at the dinner work in schools, and they were talking about the career advice being given in schools. And I sat there thinking that every element of what I do now would never have been envisaged or imagined by my careers master at school or my parents when I was at school. And I didn't find my route till I was 29. And so my advice would be, as it is to anyone of that age, if you have a vocation, if you know what you want to do, absolutely follow it. But don't panic if you don't. Just go out and enjoy life. I travelled for 15 months when I was 25. That, I think, has had a huge influence on me and where I am now, and my outlook. So I would tell the 18-year-old me to travel as much as you can before it's too late. Not to worry about career paths in your 20s, just explore and enjoy, and to relax, and you'll find what's right for you, but you don't have to follow a path that early if it doesn't strike you straight away.
Brilliant. And thank you very much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the What I Know Now podcast with Mark Kelly. To subscribe to the podcast, just enter WIKN into iTunes or any Android podcast of choice, or check out the website at www.wikn.co. I'd love to get your feedback, either positive or negative, about the episode, what action you're going to take. I look forward to seeing you next week, and remember, have an absolutely super day. Bye.